Good day, everyone. Happy to have you here on a sunny, a sunny Tuesday morning here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm glad that you're here. If you're here with us and you're hearing me live, I hope that you will say hello. Whatever platform you're on, you'll say hello and tell us where you're located as well. And we'll get started with the podcast itself in just a few minutes. But this is live, and so I really want to make this a useful time for you who are here live and not just something we're doing to record for the podcast. So while you're here, I want you to imagine you're joining us for a cup of coffee or a glass of water or whatever. So if you were around the table with us, you would ask questions, share your comments and ideas. And that's exactly what I hope that you will do with us today, because when you do that, we'll have a better conversation. You'll get more from this time, and eventually we'll have a better podcast as well. And so, speaking of podcasts, if you didn't notice, up there above my shoulder, it says the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So if you didn't know, this will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. But everything I've just said won't be part of it for reasons that are probably pretty clear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a countdown, and this is where we will trim the video and audio for the podcast itself. So welcome. So glad that you're here with us live. And now, Marissa, I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. I often say that I've said many times before. Let me do that again since I can. Marissa, in 3, 2, 1. I often say that we become a better human as we become a better leader, and vice versa. Today, we're talking with two wise leaders about some key things we can do to become a better leader. And yes, a better human being too. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could be with us live for future episodes, like some people are right now. And therefore, you could get this information sooner and interact with my guests. And so if you want to do that in the future, you can learn more by going to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. Our episode today is brought to you by our latest book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success. You can learn more, find out where you can order a copy and get an excerpt by going to longdistanceteambook.com. That's longdistanceteambook.com. And now I'm going to bring in our guests, and then I will introduce them, and let's see if we can do that. Welcome to our two guests today. They are Doug Lennick and Chuck Wachendorfer. Did I get it right, Chuck?
Perfect. Like you've been saying it your entire life.
Well, listen, I'm only going to say it once because I don't want to break the chain. Let me introduce you to the two of them, and then we'll dive in. Doug is the founding CEO of Think to Perform, a high-performance leadership development firm serving small and large organizations in a variety of industries. He has been in leadership roles for nearly 40 years and is widely recognized as an expert in the science of human behavior. Chuck Wachendorfer is the president of distribution at Think to Perform. He is a renowned leadership development professional, has worked with clients including American Express, Wells Fargo, Comerica Bank, and TD Wealth of Canada, Charles Schwab, and others. His insights on leadership have been featured extensively in media, including CNN Money, Forbes, Fortune, and the Denver Post. Together, they have written a new book titled Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It: 8 Essentials to Enhance Your Leadership Impact at Work, Home, and Anywhere Else That Needs You. Leaders, human beings. Welcome, guys. So glad that you're both here.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for having us.
So we're just going to dive in here. And again, if you're with us live, you've got questions, ask those questions as we go. We're going to dive in here and just say, Chuck, how did it come to be that you started working together? Sort of what got you to this place?
You know, our history, Doug and I's history, goes back probably longer than either one of us would want to admit. I think I met Doug in 1986. Doug was a legendary leader at that time at American Express. I was brand new to the company. I had an interest in learning and doing more in my new career as a financial advisor. And so I literally called Doug up one day. I happened to be in Minneapolis, which is where his office was based, or St. Paul, maybe, I think, at the time. Asked if I could have some time on his calendar. He didn't know me from Adam. And he made time for me to chat. And so I drove to his office. We spent, myself and another colleague, spent about probably an hour or two with Doug, kind of picking his brain on why he was doing so well and how he thought. And he was very generous with his time. And it just has always impacted my life and my career ever since. So I feel very grateful. He's actually on my Mount Rushmore of people who have influenced my life.
Well, that's got to feel pretty. See, Doug's lifting his eyes. So, Doug, I'm going to ask you a question. Of course, I did not know that story. So, Doug, I don't know. You may not remember that meeting like Chuck does. That certainly would be possible. But I'm just going to ask you a question about then and now, what you thought and how you think about the role of being a mentor. Because clearly that's what Chuck was looking for in that moment. So, like, just lean into that, Doug, and talk to us about what your thoughts are about the role of being a mentor.
Well, I'm kind of trapped in a philosopher. I'm a philosopher in a business body. So I, my role, and we think about it that in, don't wait for someone else to fix it. My view of mentorship, and we talk about it in our book, and is really change the word to leadership. I've always believed that all of us are leaders and all of us are followers. All of us are influencers and all of us are influenced. And I actually do kind of remember that meeting with Chuck because it would happen. I happen to remember that group of people, and they were rising stars. And obviously Chuck's had a great career, but I view this as a responsibility that we have. It's inherent in all of us that we are influencing others. And so we get a choice. What kind of influence do we want to be? We don't get to choose. Do I influence people? We will. We will influence people. We also will be influenced. And so I take that very seriously. So the mentor thing is a two-way deal. I learn as much from the mentee as the mentor, or my mentors would say the same to me. And so I learned from Chuck. Chuck has learned from me, and that's how it goes. And what we talk about in Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It is it's time that each of us accept the responsibility to do something rather than waiting for somebody else to do it.
Yeah, so that kind of answers my next question, but Chuck, I'll let you add to that. It is a, I get books all the time, people, whether they show up or whether people pitch them to us. And so I've been reading business books for 35, 40 years. And so I'm kind of a observer of them in many ways. And the title of this struck me immediately. Don't wait for someone else to fix it, which, by the way, sounded like my father could have written it. As it turns out. But like, what? I mean, Chuck, say a little bit more about the title, because it's not a typical title of a business.
I've been saying this for years.
Right?
She thinks we owe her royalties now. No, but it is. I think sometimes we all catch ourselves waiting. Like, I wish these other people would be different so my life could be better. And when Doug and I wrote the book, we didn't want to write a business leadership book. Doug has written several. This is my first book. We wanted to write a book that would impact anybody, anywhere, regardless of their position, their title, what job they had, what industry they were in. And I like the way you set up the podcast today. If I'm a better leader, I'm a better human, and vice versa. We definitely believe that. And to Doug's point, we're influencing people all the time. So it's about, like, what kind of influence do I want to have, and where can I make a positive impact, particularly in my own life? And if I'm living a better life, I'm going to positively impact other people, either by my example or by my influence. One of my favorite sayings is the school of experience has expensive tuition. So I can either learn this on my own, or as we were talking about earlier around mentoring, I can seek out other people to give me guidance and input and feedback. Because as we talk about in the book, we all suffer from biases. We all have psychological patterns that contribute to decision-making mistakes. And decision-making has twice the impact on performance in any area of life, more than talent and skill combined. And I can't get any smarter. My IQ is fixed, but I can become a better decision maker. And we make about 35,000 decisions a day.
Oh, and by the way, Chuck, earlier Kevin said this. You commented on what he said at the beginning. He referred to us. I wrote this down so that Kevin, I quoted you on this, and it's you called us two wise leaders. Two
exactly.
wise leaders.
Put it on the book. Put it on the website. Two wise leaders. So.
Better two wise leaders than two wise guys.
I didn't know you yet when I wrote that, so I had to, now let me, Marissa, I'm going to go back and re-record the opening. No, I'm just teasing. When I read "Don't wait for someone else to fix it," the word that immediately comes to my mind is proactive, right? And as a leader myself, I don't want my team members to wait to fix it. Just someone. Fix it, be proactive. And we can certainly connect the word being proactive with being a leader, being out front, taking charge, moving forward, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to get into all of these things as we go. One of the things, and Doug, your comment about all of us being leaders, like that's the opening chapter of the book, right? That's where we start.
Yeah, everyone's a leader. That's how we open it up. Everyone's a leader. Everyone's a follower. It's just the way it is. And once we accept that, then we get to make a choice. And that's why we say one of our essentials is you get to make a choice. And the first essential choice you should make is to aim to be your ideal self. If you aim to be your ideal self is not waiting for anyone else to fix it. And when you guys were talking about, that title and hearing our parents, I could hear my mother. I don't know if I can say this, but my mom, I will try it, but my mom would say to me, Doug, it's time to go out and clean out the dandelions. And I said, do we have to do that now? And she would say, Doug, do you have a turd in your pocket? Because there is no we here. This is you, Doug, going out there. And unless there's a turd in your pocket, there's no we. And she would say that to me. Don't wait for, this is your assignment, not we. And what we're trying to do.
Let's just take the dandelion thing for a second, because, when they first come up, now's the time we got to pick them. If we don't pull the tops off them now, in about 4 days, you're going to have seeds. And then you're going to have a lot more next year. So like I grew up on a farm. So this idea of there is a time when things have to happen. And I think a lot of folks, okay, well, maybe tomorrow, and like all of us procrastinate. I'm at the top of the list. But your point about we now, not only who are you waiting on, but we got to do it sooner than later. And sooner is almost always better. Right. So there are 8 essentials. Go ahead, Doug.
And that gets to deciding wisely, which Chuck was getting into. And that's the whole thing. We make all these decisions. And if we can learn to decide wisely, because we've got our life, we've got time. How are we going to use our time? Decide wisely. And, if people just embrace that essential, it all by itself will change people's lives. I mean, decision making, and Chuck, you were saying it, I'll throw it back to you, but how many decisions we make, and we talk about this and use examples literally in the book. It's designed, as Chuck said, to be a workbook. We actually want to call it a used book, like used cars. This will be a used book.
a dog-eared, marked book. So
exactly, just like you've done it. Thank you.
Exactly. So we will not have time, everybody, to get to all 8 of the essentials in the kind of depth that would be warranted. And so you're going to want to make sure you get a copy of this book, but from the 2 wise guys. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. So Chuck, since you brought up Decide Wisely,
sure.
Again, we could talk about any one of the 8 though, for our entire time and beyond. But what would be one thing, one salient idea, perhaps, about how we can be better at deciding wisely? What would be one tip that you would give us?
Well, here's what you can know. We're hardwired to be emotional first, logical second. And our emotions tend to sacrifice accuracy for speed. They want us to respond very quickly and are usually not the best choice. So the worst time to make any important decision is when we're emotional. So what we introduce in the book is a model that we call the 4 R's. And actually, Doug developed this years ago, and he and I were discussing it. I remember it vividly, the discussion we were having that we call the 4 R's. And the 4 R's are recognize, reflect, reframe, and respond. And so recognition is about self-awareness. Recognition is if I notice that I'm emotional, and I know that when I'm emotional, I don't make great choices. I mean, you think about a lot of the regrets that we have in our lives. Most of those regrets have come when we were emotional. We did something, we said something that we wish we could take back or we regret.
And it could be high energy, positive or negative. So
it doesn't have to be anger or frustration. It could be euphoria or excitement.
That's how casinos work. They work on some of that too. I'm seriously about that.
I always say, there's a reason why the lights are still on in there, which means that they win more than they lose. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So I have a 97-year-old mother-in-law who loves to go to the casino. So it just makes me giggle when you say that. In fact, as we're here live, that's where she is right now, as it turns out. So I love the 4 R's. I especially love this idea of a reframing, because I think when we're able to stop and take that moment and reflect, then we can reframe, which is often what we need to do. And my other observation that I'll make, and we're going to move on, is that we're pretty good at coaching others about this. Like, don't make this decision when you're emotional. Like, think about something you
sleep on
children,
it.
or to a family member or a friend. Yeah. Like, maybe you want to sleep on this. Maybe you want to wait a few days. Like, we're good at recognizing this in others. First of the 4 R's, we're not always as good at doing it for ourselves. The first two of the essentials are both about ourself. And Doug, you mentioned the first one. You said to aim to be our ideal self, which I love that way of talking about. We often talk about unleashing our potential, but that's another way of saying it. I really love that. But the other one that you talk about is knowing your real self. And so, Doug, I'm curious, what advice do you have about how do we do this better?
Well, Chuck was getting into it in the Decide Wisely. It really is it begins with the first R, it's recognition. So one of the things we can actually do, and we'll do it now, Chuck and I, we this is real time, live, right, direct. So here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to freeze. And now we're going to unfreeze. And what I'm going to ask you are 3 questions, Kevin. When I said freeze, what were you thinking about? Emotionally, how were you feeling? And physically, what were you doing?
Well, so I will answer those questions because that's what you want me to do. So what I was thinking is, I read that in the book, and I didn't know you were going to do it, but I was thinking, like, how will this play out in the podcast? And then how was I feeling? I'm like, I'm just going to go with it. It's going to be fine. And I trust Doug enough to know that it's going to be fine. And then what the third one is,
what are you doing?
Well, what I was doing was looking at myself to make sure I didn't look stupid when I was frozen.
Well, but see, that's self-awareness. So what Chuck was saying is, in decision making, deciding wisely, you got to know who you are really. So and the way the brain works is practice makes permanent. So all of our listeners, all of our viewers, whether it's live or later, anybody who starts practicing that game today, if you start practicing today, it will all by itself change your life, because it will become a habit to pay attention to yourself. Most people overestimate how aware they are of themselves. They are unaware of how often their minds wander. And Chuck has interviewed lots of great people for, Eric Larson and Chris Klinke and different people who had to decide wisely out of self-awareness. And it starts with that. And so it's the freeze game first. Know yourself. Who am I really? What? And I really am what I'm thinking. I really am how I'm feeling. I really am what I'm doing. That's me really right now. Now, I'm aiming to be my ideal self. And if I recognize that my real self in the moment is less than ideal, I can now make a decision.
Yep.
And that's the concept. And that's what Chuck was talking about. Now I get to make a decision, and I can decide wisely. I can decide to think what I need to think. I can decide to do what I need to do, regardless of how I feel, so that I can achieve my goals consistent with who I view myself to be ideally. And that's the full enchilada right there.
That is the full enchilada. So one of the things you talk about in the book, one of the 8 things, is learning agility, but you don't call it that, at least not at first. The title of the essential is really fantastic. It's let go of what you know. And I think as positional leaders, right? Leaders with a job title, that this is especially hard. I mean, it's hard for us as human beings, of course, but when we have the mantle of leader on, oftentimes we were promoted because of what we know, and we were promoted because we were smart and we had experience and wisdom and all that stuff. And yet you're saying that we need to let go of what we know, Chuck.
Well, it's not letting go of everything.
Like I said, it's not. It is about learning agility, but I love that you frame it this way, rather and then talk about learning agility, and say we're going to talk about learning agility, right? So, what do you mean?
Knowing what to let go of. You know, one of the people we interviewed for the book is a guy named Jeff Stiefler. Jeff Stiefler used to be president of American Express. He's done many amazing things in his life, but he has a saying that everybody wants to be in the groove, but nobody wants to be in a rut. And wisdom is knowing the difference. So every pattern of behavior is a pattern because at some point we got results with that. What happens is as we get older and our lives change, some of those patterns begin to hold us back. So we tell a story about a woman named Sharon that I worked with many years ago. Sharon was a very successful executive, had her own business, did very well financially, and was miserable. And one of the patterns she was noticing was that she took care of everybody else in her life and didn't take care of herself. So she was about 100 pounds overweight. She didn't work out. She ate one meal a day at 8 o'clock at night. She worked from about 7:30 to about 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock at night. She had a stay-at-home husband, 2 adult children that lived at home. She took care of her clients, her staff, her family, everybody. And we were having a conversation around this pattern where she sacrificed her own needs regularly. And I said, Sharon, where did you learn that? And without any hesitation, she said, I was raised by a single mom. When I was 7 years old, my mom came down with cancer. And so from 7 years old till 11, when I was 11 years old, my mom died. I took care of my mom. Yep. And that's what Sharon needed to do when she was a child, but it was counter to what most children learn and experience growing up. Our parents take care of us. In Sharon's case, she took care of her mom. And that was a pattern she continued well into her 50s. So now Sharon got to decide, do I want to continue that pattern that worked for me as a child, or do I want to begin establishing boundaries? But it took this recognition and understanding of where that pattern came from. And that's true for all of us.
Yeah. And so we got to let go. We got to figure out what we don't want to let go of everything we know.
No.
There's certain things we need to be willing to let go of. It's interesting because when I was reading the book, I was in that chapter. And then every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I write a newsletter called Your Remarkable Day. And I needed to write tomorrow's. And yesterday I was with a client, with a group of leaders, and I heard the familiar refrain that you both have heard a million times. Like, what do we do with the people who say, well, we've always done it this way? And something that I was reading as I was reading in the book got me thinking, that's what I want to write about. So that's what I wrote about. The idea is we've got to help people to say it worked once. Is it still working? Like, is it, I mean, yes, that's true. like so often what we want to do is want to push back when that person says we've always done it this way. What we need to do is explore it more, right? Give them the chance to recognize that perhaps it's not quite as rosy and red hot as it once was.
Well,
There's
am I
one other
getting
thing.
the results in my life and my business that I want? If I'm not, then it's the definition of insanity. And
100%.
right, and the only person's behavior we can control is our own. So what I have to ask myself is, what is it that I'm doing or not doing that's contributing to the results I'm seeing? A lot of times we get brought into an organization where they want us to change other people. So if you fix these other people, they don't say it this way. If you fix these other people, we'll be fine.
Yeah. My dad always used to say, when you point your finger at someone, there's 3 fingers pointing at you.
It's like, what we have to help them realize is, how are you contributing to what you're seeing? And that's what most of us don't see, is like, how am I contributing to, what I want to be different in my life?
Doug, there's another piece in that section about learning agility that you guys outline as the comfort growth paradox, which fits with what we're talking right now. Doug, do you want to talk about that just for a second? The comfort growth paradox.
Well, if you ask somebody, and our colleague at Think to Perform, Ray Kelly, talks about this all the time, and he also has developed his own version of 5 levels of leadership. But this comfort growth paradox is, if you ask the question, if you had a choice, Kevin, between being comfortable and uncomfortable, what would you choose?
Well, most of the time I'd probably pick comfort.
Yeah, and most people would choose that. If if I got a choice. Now, if I have a choice between being comfortable or growing as an individual, professionally and personally, which would I choose? Growth or comfort?
Right, I would probably choose to grow, right?
Yeah, that's what people intellectually choose. Behaviorally, they frequently choose comfort.
Yeah.
And so everybody knows the right answer. The right answer is, well, of course I would choose growth. That's a decision that they make that they don't execute.
100%. 100%.
So that's the key. So that's the comfort growth paradox. So if and people, if you want to grow, then you must accept there will be discomfort. The personal growth comes fully equipped with discomfort. And that's why, as Chuck was talking about earlier, we focus on developing those differentiating competencies, which are emotional and moral. Uniquely human, by the way. Machines don't have emotions. Machines don't have a conscience. This is uniquely human. And this is really important. It's really important for our listeners, readers, viewers, whoever gets the message, however they get it. It's very important. And it's very important that they recognize not that they personally should not wait for anybody else to fix it. This is a toolkit. The book is a toolkit that you can use to fix stuff.
And we all got stuff we ought to fix. And oftentimes we're waiting for somebody else to fix it for us. So I have a couple of sort of bigger picture questions before we wrap up. I'm curious what you think. I'll let either of you take this, or maybe both of you take it in a short form. So we've all lived and worked through a pandemic, and I guess lived and worked both, right? Sure. The question is, as it relates to these essentials that we've been talking about and that you've written about, did the pandemic help, or did it hurt, or is it like how did that experience that we've all lived through made us maybe more aware of or better at any of these essentials? Let's just start there. Has it helped us in any way in relationship to these essentials?
Well, I would say this. You said, has it helped or hurt? And I would say yes. It has helped.
That's why I reframed my question.
No, it has helped and it has hurt.
How
it has helped and it has hurt. And that's the age-old question: is the glass half empty or half full? The truth is, it's half empty and half full. And until you understand that, all the COVID did is it helped us see some of the things differently faster. And some of us responded less well. I was one of them. The COVID wasn't so good. Anybody who reads Aim to Be Your Ideal Self is going to hear an unflattering opening story about Doug Lennick, and living in alignment, being this ideal guy that I've always wanted to be is not a lifetime achievement award. That's why we have to pay attention to ourselves. So I would just say that. I don't know, Chuck, if you would add.
Chuck, I'll give you a more specific question, Chuck. What's one way that you think, and I mean, we're sort of asking not for an individual, but sort of, societally, globally.
Sure.
What's one thing that maybe as leaders we've gotten a little better at because of, how did the pandemic help us?
It's a great question. I think what the pandemic did in a positive way for us is it interrupted, back to what we were saying earlier, all of our patterns of behavior. How we worked, where we worked, what we did, how we did it. I mean, so all of a sudden for about 2 years, these things that we were marching along doing, driving to work, going to the office, this is what I do. I get my coffee. I mean, all of that, how I spend time with my family, all of that was changed for most of us. I won't say for all of us, but I'd say for most of us, all of that was interrupted. So I'd say many people, not all people, had some awareness around, well, how do I figure this out? How do I want my life to be? Those are questions that most people were asking themselves, and it caused a re-examination of our lives. And I think what many leaders are trying to do is go back to the way things were. And as I'm sure you're experiencing in your work, Kevin, it's like that horse has left the barn. Like, we can't unknow what we just experienced.
The bungee cord is not going all the way back to where it started.
Right. And so what's this new way of being? Like, we're not going back to the way things were. So what's this new way that we want to be? And that takes some conversation. That takes some leadership to say, guide those conversations to say, no, we still have to be productive. Yeah. We still have to add value, but maybe we think about it in a different way. That takes some learning agility. That takes some courage to have that conversation. Yep. And that's really where leadership is so important. If people if people were machines, they do what they were always supposed to do, but they're not. So leadership is important. One of my favorite definitions of leadership comes from a guy named Joel Barker. And his definition is leadership is about taking people to a place they would not normally go on their own. And so it's about, okay, so, we have a business, we have to add value to our clients. How do we want to, this is an opportunity to re-examine how we're doing that. That's the positive, I think that came out of COVID.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, I've got a couple of questions that I ask pretty much all of our guests over time, and it's a bit of a shift from where we've been. So Doug, I'm going to have you go first, but I want both of you to answer both of these questions. And the first one is, so Doug, what do you do for fun?
What I do for fun is I play with my grandchildren. That's the most fun I have, is being with my grandchildren. I have two that are just 2 years old. They're 10 days apart, a boy and a girl. And I just gave one of them last night his Timberwolves jersey. His name is Conroy, and I call him Big C. So he's number 3, Big C. So that's what I do for fun. My oldest grandchild is 15, and I'm driving his hand-me-down car right now. So he will get this car when he's 16, and that's the most fun I have, frankly. But I love working. I have to admit, I just have fun most of the time, but the most fun is my grandchildren right now.
Chuck, what about you?
I enjoy anything outside. So I live in Colorado. If it's camping, if it's skiing, if it's just sitting around a campfire, I realized years ago that some of the best times of my life have been around a campfire, usually with people that I care about, my family, my friends. So I try and be outside running. Doesn't matter. Anytime I'm outside, I'm usually enjoying myself, and it doesn't matter about what kind of weather I'm having or we're having.
We're both old Boy Scouts, operative word old. So with the campfire deal is really I'm an important part of our lives. A lot of good things happen around the campfire.
Gotcha. So when you're not around the campfire and you're not playing with the grandkids, Chuck, what are you reading? What's something you're reading now or have read recently that you might share with us?
Two books that really stand out for me. One is a book by Stephen Covey, M.R. Covey. We actually interviewed Stephen for our book, and he endorsed our book. He wrote a book out here recently called Trust and Inspire. If you're familiar with Stephen, M.R. Covey, I know many of us know his dad, but M.R. Covey wrote a book called The Speed of Trust, and where high trust exists, things move faster and are cheaper. And so trust is really important in life and business in particular. The second book I'm reading is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's all about how to stop bad habits and start good ones. And it gets to what we were talking about earlier. If I want to change my behavior, how do I begin doing that? And that's where I think his book's so important and so significant. I don't need to be going to the gym an hour a day or running 5 miles a day if I've done nothing. But could I do a push-up? Could I take the stairs instead of the elevator? Well, probably we could. Could I drink more water? Probably I could. And so it's this incremental progress towards being the person I want to be.
Perfect. Doug, what are you reading?
I'm reading a book right now. One of the things we do here at Think to Perform at our company is we have every other week, we have this thing called Dialoguing with Doug. Anybody can join in. And typically what we do is a book review. And the book we're using right now, and it's phenomenal, is called Big Feelings by one of the authors' names is Liz Fosling. And Liz will actually be we do an annual conference, and the Evolve conference for Think to Perform will be this fall, October 3rd and 4th. And she's one of our speakers. But Big Feelings, she's an illustrator. A lot of people might be familiar with her. And I'm just starting a book, and we'll be doing some work with another client of ours on the book, The Goal. So, which and we're big on this whole concept of goal. So we read things that help us deepen our understanding of things that we already are knowing. And that's part of the let go of what you know, is knowing is the enemy of learning. And so part of why we say let go of what you know is so that you don't get stuck thinking, I know this, because once you declare I know, then you shut yourself off. And both Chuck and I read and write and try not to shut ourselves off, but it's hard. It's not, it's not easy growing up.
Before we go, the last question, the question you've been wanting me to ask since the very beginning is, where can we learn more? Where do you want to point people related to the book or the other stuff that you're doing? Where do you want to point people in relationship to the book?
You can get the book on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, our online bookstore, a whole variety of places. And the plug I'll make for the book is you don't have to use all its 8 essentials to see an impact in your life. It is, as Doug mentioned, an application-focused book. So there's exercises, tools, concepts that you can use and apply, and you don't have to use all of them, but you do have to use some of them.
Well, you don't have to, but if you don't, you're not going to make it's not going to make any difference, right? It's not a very good pillow, as it turns out. So I'm also confident that people might want to go to Think to Perform, think2perform.com to learn more about these guys, their work, etc.
The values exercise we talk about in the book, you can do on our website for free.
There you go.
So yeah. It's part of becoming my ideal self. Knowing my ideal self is knowing my values, and you can do that on our website. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, if anybody wants to do it, Kevin, they could literally in 10 minutes, they can do the values exercise right now before the next half hour comes up.
There you go. Think2perform.com. Now, before I send you off and them off, I've got a question for all of you. It's the question I ask you every single week. What are you going to do? Now what? Now that you've gotten these ideas from these two wise leaders, see, Doug, now that you've had the chance to hear some things, maybe about the 3 R's, maybe it's something about the idea of using the freeze game to help you become more aware of yourself. Maybe it's thinking about the difference between a groove and a rut. What is it that you, and just a few of the things that I wrote down today, the challenge for you is to take action on what you learned, because if you just wanted to be entertained, you could have picked something better. But if you really wanted to get better, then it requires us to take action. So I hope that you will do that. Answer that question. What did you get today that will make a difference for you when you apply it? Because as we said earlier, practice makes permanent. So I want to thank both of you guys for being here. Thanks so much for having joined us.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.
Have you.
Thank you. Thanks to you, and remarkable podcast. We love it. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's where I'll leave us. If you are here for the first time, go to wherever you find your podcasts and you'll find the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If you can't find it, just go to remarkablepodcast.com, where you can listen to and watch every episode, but also find a place to subscribe. So subscribe, like it, refer it, tell someone else to join us next week when we'll be back for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.